Two children, left tied in the snow. No screaming, just two pairs of eyes asking if kindness still exists in this world. Some mornings, the silence in your bones feels heavier than winter. But what if, just once, a wounded dog nudges you into a forest where the world waits to see if you'll choose to stay? This is the story of a quiet cop, two lost girls, and a German shepherd who carried their pain in silence, until kindness made its way back, one gentle act at a time. In Grey Pines, healing wasn't a miracle. It was the simple, stubborn art of not leaving each other behind. In the winter heart of Grey Pines, the world moved in slow, muted rhythms. The dawn came not with promise, but with a pale hush that filled every room, every street, every hollow of the woods beyond town. On mornings like this, Elliot Harlan woke before the alarm. He lay for a moment in bed, watching his breath form in the faint light leaking through old curtains, feeling the tight ache in his chest, where grief lived like a stone. He reached for the wool blanket at his side, pulled it over his knees, and waited. Somewhere in the dark kitchen, the pipes moaned. The heater had stopped again. He listened to the sounds of the house as it settled in the cold, a small tap of expansion in the walls, the faint creak of the window frame. When he finally rose, his movements were slow, careful, as if any sudden motion might wake old memories best left sleeping. On the mantel, beside the chipped mug he used every morning, was a faded photograph. His wife smiled back at him from across a distance of years, her eyes soft and clear. He touched the glass lightly, not lingering, just a small act, then turned away. In the kitchen, Elliot moved quietly. The coffee pot was slow to warm, its hiss and sigh a familiar song in the silence. He spooned grounds, poured water, waited. The floor beneath his feet was cold, even through thick socks. He let the routine settle his mind. The smell of dark roast, the click of the old stove, the scrape of a single chair pulled out just enough to sit. There was comfort in the pattern, even if comfort felt like something remembered, not lived. Sig, the dog, waited by the window. His coat, dense and a little unkempt, caught the first blue wash of morning light. He didn't whine, didn't scratch. He simply watched the world outside, ears twitching now and then, tail curled over his paws. His presence was a kind of gravity in the room, quiet, certain, necessary. Elliot noticed how Sig's eyes sometimes lingered on the snow, tracking things invisible to human sight. Sometimes Elliot thought the dog saw more than he did, not just shapes or movement, but old pain, shadows that stretched from one life into another. There was a fresh scar on Sig's left leg, the hair grown back uneven over the mark. Elliot never asked if it hurt. Sig never said. Outside, a thick mist clung to the town, blurring the sharp edges of houses, burying street signs, swallowing every sound but the distant shush of wind through pine. The world felt emptied out, as if it might never fill again. Elliot sipped his coffee, standing by the window. Across the yard, the bird feeder hung motionless. No chickadees, no sparrows today. Even the crows kept to the tree line, silent sentinels watching the world hold its breath. He let himself look back, just for a moment, at the photograph on the mantel. The gold ring on his finger felt heavier in winter. There was no warmth in the memory, just a steady ache. Loss, he knew, was something you learned to walk with. Not a wound to be healed, but a presence to be carried. He dressed for work with methodical care. Each piece, thermal undershirt, navy uniform, heavy boots, added a layer between himself and the world. He took out the old pair of wool gloves from the drawer, the ones his wife had knit years ago, now a little ragged at the cuffs. He paused with them in his hands, then tucked them into his coat pocket. Sig watched, as he did every morning. Not eager, not impatient, just waiting. Elliot knelt by the door and brushed his hand once over the dog's head. The touch was gentle, but brief. Sig pressed into it, then pulled away, settling his weight onto his good leg. There was no need for words between them. Two beings, each marked by what they had survived, neither asking for more than presence. The house locked behind them with a click that seemed to echo. The yard was soft with new snow, unmarked but for the small tracks of a rabbit. Sig stepped ahead, careful not to disturb the prints, moving with a limp so practiced it had become part of his gait. Elliot followed, the cold biting at his ears, the world a blue hush. They walked to the patrol car together, Sig's breath trailing white in the air. Before opening the door, Elliot paused, glancing at the horizon where the pines stood black and tall against the rising light. For a heartbeat, he stood completely still, listening, not for danger, but for the quiet, for whatever might be hidden there. Inside the car, Sig took his usual place in the back seat, curling tight, head resting on his paws. Elliot adjusted the rearview mirror. In it, he caught his own eyes, tired and a little hollow, and behind them, Sig's steady gaze. No judgment, no question. Just the recognition of a companion who knew something about being left behind, about finding a way to keep moving, anyway. Elliot started the engine, hands tight on the wheel, the dashboard flickering awake. The radio stayed silent. The heater coughed, then hummed. He drove the first mile in quiet, letting the tires find their way over icy roads, watching the sky shift from night to morning. In the mirror, Sig watched with him. There was no conversation, no explanation, only the slow, patient unfolding of a day, the thin thread of trust woven silently between a man and his dog, each bearing wounds the world could not see. And in that silence, before the first call, before any voices broke the hush, there was already a promise that whatever waited beyond the snow, neither would meet it alone. The morning never truly brightened. Instead, the sky remained locked in a gray stillness, clouds thick as wool, pressing low over the town. Elliot let the patrol car wind along the edge of gray pines, tires crunching over old, packed snow. Every so often he adjusted the heater, but the chill persisted, seeping into the bones of the old Crown Vic, rising from the floorboards, reaching for his hands despite the wool gloves. Sig sat upright in the back seat, not quite tense but attentive. His amber eyes flicked from the passing trees to the shifting play of light across the windshield. Now and then, his ears twitched, responding to sounds Elliot couldn't hear, the flutter of a jay taking flight, the distant rumble of a plow along Maine, the small secret signals of winter forest life. The town's houses soon gave way to open fields, fences leaning under the weight of snow. Beyond, the land rose in gentle folds, then tipped into a wild, jumbled wood. The sycamores and pines pressed together, forming a wall against the wind. Elliot preferred these outskirts, their honest silence, the way the world seemed larger and more unknown. He slowed as they passed the old sawmill, now nothing more than collapsed boards and rusted iron. A flock of crows rose from the roof, scattering in the air, then settling again as if nothing had changed. Sig watched them, head tilting, but made no sound. Near the forest's edge, Elliot brought the car to a halt. He turned off the ignition and let the hush return, thick, almost absolute. He opened the door, boots landing in snow that crunched under his weight. The air was sharp with cold. the wind carrying the distant scent of wood smoke and pine resin. Sig leapt from the back seat, landing softly, favoring his left leg. He stood still for a moment, nose lifted, drawing the world into his lungs. Elliot watched him, waiting for that subtle shift, the one that always came when the dog sensed something not quite right. At first, nothing moved, only the faint tremor of branches in the wind, the falling hush of flakes drifting from high limbs. Elliot walked to the trunk, retrieved his flashlight and a battered notebook, then turned back to Sig. The dog had gone rigid, body angled toward a dense patch of brush, a line of young birches with their trunks banded in white and gray. Sig's tail stood straight behind him, ears sharply forward. Then, without a glance at Elliot, he slipped into the undergrowth, moving with a careful purpose. Elliot followed, boots sinking deep. The snow here was unbroken, pure as linen, until he noticed a scatter of small tracks, too erratic for deer, too large for rabbit. He knelt, careful not to disturb the pattern. Child's footprints, the weight uneven, some toes dragging, a stagger in the gait. Not running, not playing, just going, one step after another, as if there was nowhere left to turn. He looked up, caught the briefest flash of Sig's tail, already far ahead, winding through brambles. The only sounds were his own breath and the faint rustle of the dog's passage. Elliot pressed forward, each step measured. He didn't call out. Words felt out of place here, as if the forest itself needed to listen. Snow weighed down the branches overhead, muffling every sound but the steady crunch of boots and the careful, almost reverent movements of Sig's paws. The air was so still that Elliot could hear his own pulse, steady but a little quickened now, an old worry rising behind his ribs. A shape appeared in the drift, at first only a blur, then clearer, the print of a small hand pressed into the snow near the base of a pine. Beside it, the mark of knees, and then, farther on, the faint drag of something heavier, a coat perhaps, or a blanket. The tracks didn't move in a straight line. They circled, doubled back, then veered sharply toward a thicket of brambles. Sig had stopped, his body lowered, head close to the ground. He moved in small, careful arcs, nose working. Elliot paused beside him, kneeling in the snow. He placed a gloved hand on the dog's shoulder, feeling the tension in the muscles, the alertness in every line. Sig's ears flicked. A low, almost inaudible whine escaped him, a sound Elliot had come to recognize, reserved for moments when something in the world was broken or lost. It was a warning, but also a plea. Elliot's breath clouded in the air as he studied the tracks. They were joined now by another set, larger, but just as unsteady. 2 children then, not one. He let his gaze follow the trail, every so often finding a splash of color, a pink mitten half buried, a button pressed into the snow, the faint smudge of something darker, as if a sleeve had brushed wet earth beneath the ice. He moved quietly, matching Sig's pace. The forest around them closed in, branches arched overhead, sky nearly gone. Now and then, a patch of sunlight slipped through, cold and silvery, lighting the snow in blue. They reached the base of an old spruce. The tracks here grew more erratic, looping, crossing, as if the children had spun in confusion or exhaustion. Elliot glanced at Sig, whose tail wagged once, tentative, before he pressed forward. The smell, whatever it was, called to him more urgently now. Elliot crouched, inspecting a scuffed patch of earth where the snow had been kicked away. Beneath, a scrap of fabric, red plaid, torn at the edge. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. The cloth was stiff, cold. He pressed it between his fingers, then tucked it into his pocket. Ahead, Sig stopped again. This time, he looked back, meeting Elliot's gaze. In his eyes, Elliot saw something familiar, a flicker of old pain, the shadow of memories neither of them could name. The two of them paused in that silence, man and dog, each carrying scars that the world could not see, each drawn by the mystery of small, stumbling footsteps in a winter forest. Elliot stood slowly, the cold biting deeper now. Sig waited, not impatient, just steady, the way he always was when the world turned strange. Together they moved forward into the trees, leaving the known behind, following nothing but the story the snow was trying to tell. No words were needed. There was only the sound of their passage, the crunch of snow, the soft exhale of breath, the whisper of a dog's coat brushing past low branches as they slipped deeper into the hush of the woods, searching for what the world had left behind. It was always quiet in the forest after snow, but today, the hush felt different. The deeper Elliot and Sig moved among the pines, the more the world seemed to hold its breath. Sound was stripped away, no wind, no birdsong, just the muffled crunch of boots and the soft passage of a limping dog through undergrowth weighted with ice. They came to a small hollow where the trees opened up, revealing a dip in the land where snow had drifted deep and blue-shadowed. Here the tracks grew denser, more confused, circling, stumbling, at times almost doubling back. Elliot paused, watching as Sig sniffed along a tangled knot of prints, his nose low, tail barely moving. He knelt and traced a small shoe print with a gloved finger. The edges were blurred, half melted, but the pattern was unmistakable. A child's boot, rubber sole worn smooth on the outside edge. Next to it, a smaller, sharper print, another child, or maybe the same one now lagging behind. Elliot followed the path with his eyes, tracing it to a pair of sunken depressions against the trunk of a massive pine, needles pressed flat beneath their weight. Sig whined again, this time louder. The sound echoed strange and thin against the snow, vibrating in the air. Elliot's breath stilled. He moved forward, careful, every step deliberate, as if crossing into a space sacred with pain. He saw them then, two girls, backs pressed together, arms twisted awkwardly behind. They sat half-buried in the drift, cheeks raw with cold, faces smeared with tracks of old tears. Their coats, thin and dirty, clung to their frames. One had lost a mitten, the other wore a knit hat that had slipped down over her eyes. Their hair was the same, dark, tangled, bits of frost clinging to the ends. Duct tape covered their mouths. Their hands, blue and swollen, were tied together with an old rope that looked frayed at the knots. One girl's knees were drawn to her chest. The other's legs stuck out straight, toes trembling inside boots that didn't match. They didn't move. For a long, slow moment, it seemed they might be frozen. Statues left behind in the woods, sculpted from fear and winter. Sig stepped forward, his body low, tail curled beneath. He nosed gently at the smaller girl's shoulder, his breath fogging in the cold. She flinched, her eyes wide and shining, but she did not cry out. The other girl turned her head, searching for the source of warmth, of presence, something living that was not cold or silent. Elliot moved carefully, kneeling in the snow, his knees sending up small clouds of powder. He looked into the eyes of the girl closest, hazel, rimmed red, ringed with something that was not quite hope. He did not speak. Instead, with slow hands, he reached for the tape at the edge of her mouth, peeled it back, careful not to pull skin. She did not struggle, her breath came shallow and quick, but she kept her eyes on his face. He did the same for the second girl, then worked at the knots with hands steady from years of quiet work. The rope came away, leaving angry ridges on their wrists. Sig licked one of the bruised hands, his tongue warm against skin gone almost gray. The girl shivered, but did not pull away. Instead, she reached with slow, clumsy fingers to bury them in his fur. Elliot pulled a blanket from his pack, wrapping it around their shoulders. He checked for injuries without words, a gentle press of his thumb against pulse points, a glance at their faces for signs of fever or frostbite. One girl tried to say something, lips moving silently, but the sound died in her throat. He found a small chocolate bar in his pocket, offered it to them by laying it on the edge of the blanket. Neither moved at first. Then the older girl, or perhaps simply the braver one, took it in numb fingers and broke it in half, sharing it with her sister without a word. Their faces were so similar, cheekbones sharp with hunger, eyes huge, hair curling in the same wild direction. But in their expressions, Elliot saw different stories. The one with the missing mitten stared at him, hope flickering faint in her eyes. The other, hat pulled down, seemed not to see him at all, her gaze distant, as if watching something inside herself. Elliot wanted to say something, anything to anchor them to this moment, to the fact that they were found, not forgotten. Instead, he simply placed a gloved hand gently on each shoulder, pressing just enough to remind them of warmth, of human contact that meant safety, not threat. Sig settled close, curling his body around their feet, sheltering them from the wind. His eyes flicked from one girl to the other, then up to Elliot, as if asking whether it was enough, whether just being there could undo the cold and the fear. The girls did not speak. Their breathing was ragged but alive. Snow fell softly around them, dusting their hair, collecting on the blanket. In that stillness, time seemed to pause. Elliot could hear only the beat of his own heart and the slow, patient rhythm of Sig's breath. He thought of all the reasons people vanished from one another: hurt, shame, exhaustion, the simple impossibility of living in a world that demanded so much and offered so little. These children, left here as if their absence could be covered by snow, were proof that even in the quietest towns, pain could find a way in. But they were found, not by a miracle, not by heroism, but by a man and a dog, both carrying wounds of their own, both unable to turn away from what hurt most to see. Without a word, Elliot began the slow, careful process of helping the girls to their feet, gathering them into the world again. Sig stayed close, head bowed, tail brushing against the backs of their legs as if to say, "You are not alone, not anymore." The journey back through the woods was slow, and neither the man nor the dog hurried the girls. Snow fell lightly, painting the forest in shifting veils of white and gray. Elliot's coat was heavy around the shoulders of June and Joan, blanket tucked close. Sig trotted just ahead, pausing often to look back, eyes alert to every slip or falter in the girls' steps. At the patrol car, the world narrowed to the soft thud of doors closing and the warmth of the engine ticking awake. Inside, time hung suspended. The air steamed with the scent of wet wool, old coffee, and the faint coppery smell of cold skin thawing. Elliot moved quietly, adjusting the heater, tucking the blanket tighter around the twins without fuss. The silence in the car was not heavy, only cautious, like the hush before the first light of morning. June shivered, arms curled to her chest, face turned to the window fogged with her own breath. Joan slid down in her seat, eyes half shut, hair damp at the edges from snowmelt. No one spoke. Even Sig, now curled at their feet, did not whine or shift, simply exhaled, a long, slow sigh, then rested his chin on Joan's boots. Elliot watched them all in the mirror. In that pane of glass, 4 shapes: a man hollowed by old loss, 2 children marked by the fresh ache of being left, and a dog whose only language was presence. He saw how June's fingers tugged at the edge of the blanket, small movements, almost invisible, like someone knitting together the pieces of herself. He saw how Joan's gaze wandered, not searching for rescue, but for something familiar, something that might promise the world could be gentle again. From the glove compartment, Elliot took a pack of tissues, set it on the seat beside June. She didn't reach for them. He let them be. The world outside was a blur of falling snow, gray light, and the faint outline of trees retreating behind them. Every so often, the patrol car's tires slid a little, finding their grip again on ice. Elliot's hands loose but certain on the wheel, muscle memory taking over where words failed. Sig shifted. With a quiet determination, he pressed closer to the twins, his body a shield against the cold. Joan, still half adrift in exhaustion, let her hand drop, fingers brushing against the warmth of his neck. Sig didn't move. Her hand found the soft spot just behind his ear, and for a moment, her whole body seemed to loosen. She did not smile. She only closed her eyes and breathed. Elliot reached for a thermos, poured warm water into the plastic lid, and set it in the cup holder between the seats. He did not prompt the girls to drink, but the gesture was clear. There would be warmth, even if they could not yet claim it. He pulled the car over at the edge of the forest, let the engine idle. The world seemed to pause, caught between the hush of snow and the low rumble of the heater. He took out a small notepad, scribbled a few lines. Nothing about trauma, only names, the date, the word safe. The tip of the pen lingered, then stilled. A silence stretched, long enough for the world to become soft and shapeless. June leaned into Joan, cheek against her sister's temple, the way you do when you've forgotten how to trust the dark, but remember the shape of comfort. Joan's breath fogged the window, and with a single finger, she drew the outline of a circle. Then beside it, a shape that might have been a dog. When she finished, she watched it fade, disappearing into the mist of her breath. Sig's eyes followed the movement. For a heartbeat, Elliot wondered what the dog saw, the world as it was, or as it could be, a place where those left behind are not truly lost. The heat began to work through their coats, thawing stiff hands and numb toes. Elliot rummaged in the glove box, producing 2 small, round cookies wrapped in waxed paper. He placed one on each girl's lap, a quiet offering. No words. June looked at the cookie, then at Elliot. She did not reach for it, but her gaze lingered. Joan's fingers curled around hers beneath the blanket. Sig licked at a patch of ice on his own paw, then shifted to rest against June's shin. The touch was so gentle, so intentional, that June almost didn't notice at first. But then she pressed the sole of her boot back, just enough so that Sig's weight could lean into her. A silent agreement. I am here, you are here, and that is enough. Minutes passed, marked only by the hum of the car, the shiver of wind at the window, the slow return of color to the twins' cheeks. Elliot watched as June finally took a small bite of her cookie. Joan remained still, her eyes open but distant, as if seeing something only she could name. No one asked questions. No one demanded explanations. Even the radio remained silent, a steady presence in the background, its red light blinking, a heartbeat for the space between them. When it was time to move again, Elliot eased the car into gear, hands gentle on the wheel. The snow had lessened, the road opening before them as if inviting them home. Sig stood, stretched, then lay down again, head across both girls' feet, breath steady, the picture of patience. Elliot looked back once more in the mirror. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself to hope. Not for answers, not even for justice, but for a small, persistent warmth that grew between four lost souls sharing the hush after a storm. And in that car, sealed against the cold, bound together by silence and the fragile thread of new trust, something shifted. Not healed, not yet, but something opening, like the faintest crack of light along the horizon. The patrol car rolled slowly along the snow-packed road, headlights cutting short tunnels of light into the early winter dusk. Each turn of the wheel was measured, unhurried. Elliot felt the weight of the day settle deep in his shoulders, but his hands remained steady, guiding them back toward the small safety of town. The heater worked tirelessly to keep the chill at bay, yet the inside of the car felt insulated from more than cold, a cocoon of silence, a shelter for wounds that were still too new for words. In the back seat, June and Joan were wrapped together beneath the blanket, sharing what little warmth their bodies could make. June stared out the window, her eyes following the blur of trees and houses, lips pressed in a thin line, as if she was willing herself to become invisible. Joan sat pressed close, head against her sister's shoulder, her small hand cradling the edge of Sig's collar. The dog's breath came slow and deep. He had shifted his body just enough that both girls could feel the heat radiating from his side. It was June who broke the silence, not with a voice but with a movement. Her fingers trailed down the fogged glass, sketching half circles, then pausing to watch the shapes dissolve. She did not look at Elliot, nor at Sig. Instead, she seemed to drift somewhere far away, between now and before. A memory, perhaps, or just the comfort of repetition. Her finger finally stilled, drawing a single vertical line. She let her hand fall and turned her head toward Joan, whose eyelids fluttered but did not close. Elliot glanced in the mirror, reading the exhaustion in the small, pale faces behind him. He knew better than to ask what had happened. Some wounds could not be coaxed open by questions. Some pain required only company. So he drove, letting the quiet shape itself around them. A bag of ginger cookies rested on the passenger seat, uneaten since autumn. Elliot reached back, his arm steady, and placed one in each girl's hand, then pressed a second into Sig's mouth, the dog taking it with careful restraint. The girls accepted the offering without comment. June nibbled the edge of hers, as if testing the world's reality. Joan simply held hers, rolling it slowly between thumb and forefinger. For a long time, only the murmur of tires on snow and the soft rush of the heater filled the car. The radio remained off, its presence a promise of safety, not yet needed, not yet trusted. Outside, gray pines slid by in silent tableau. A white fence sagging under ice, a lamp glowing weakly in a frosted window. The dark hulk of an abandoned tractor covered in soft drifts. In the dusk, the town seemed at once eternal and fragile, its edges blurred by the hush of snow. Halfway home, a new scent drifted into the car. Toast, faint and sweet, riding the wind from some distant kitchen. June's nose twitched, and for the first time a ripple of something like longing crossed her face. She turned, voice just above a whisper, speaking not to Elliot, nor to her sister, but to the space in front of her. Mama used to make toast on Sunday, with cinnamon. The words, once spoken, seemed to hover in the air, neither invitation nor plea. Joan's eyes flickered. She said nothing, but her hand tightened around Sig's fur, anchoring herself to what was real. Elliot heard the sentence, felt it settle somewhere deep, a thread reaching back to mornings lost in another life. He did not reply. Instead, he slowed the car, rolling past a familiar bakery, the sign painted by hand, windows fogged over, the golden glow within promising comfort. For a moment he considered stopping, but decided against it. The girls were not ready for the world outside, not yet. He drove on. June began to hum, so soft even Sig barely noticed. Joan drew her knees to her chest, watching the rhythm of Sig's breathing, her own breath slowly matching his. Elliot glanced at the girls in the rearview. In their small gestures, shoulders curling, heads leaning, hands tracing invisible circles, he saw the slow, stumbling work of piecing together safety. Sig's eyes closed, body relaxing as the motion of the car lulled him towards sleep. Even in rest, he kept one paw outstretched, just touching Joan's boot, as if to say, "I am here, I will not leave." The first lights of the station came into view, soft halos against the growing dark. Elliot parked under the only working lamp, letting the engine idle. For a moment, no one moved. He shut off the ignition and listened as the heater wound down, leaving only the faint crackle of settling snow. He turned in his seat, not expecting words, but offering his presence. Slowly, June lifted her head, searching his face for something unnamed. He offered a gentle nod, the closest thing to comfort he could give. Joan leaned against Sig, who yawned wide, then licked the back of her hand with a rough, warm tongue. She did not flinch. Instead, her hand rested on his head, a silent pact of trust renewed. Elliot stepped out into the cold, circling to open the back door. The winter air rushed in, sharp and pure. June shivered, drawing the blanket closer. Joan hesitated, then climbed out, Sig jumping down beside her, steadying her with the warmth of his body. He led them into the station, past the flicker of fluorescent lights, past the bulletin boards crowded with faded notices and community events. Inside, the world seemed smaller, quieter. Elliot motioned them to a bench beside a humming radiator. June perched beside Joan, legs swinging, hands tucked under thighs. Sig sat at their feet, tail sweeping the floor, eyes watchful and unafraid. He brought them each a cup of warm milk, setting it on the bench with a nod. He said nothing about the day, nothing about fear, nothing about being found. In the quiet, the small sound of June sipping, the careful, almost reverent way Joan held her cup, these things were enough. Outside, the snow fell heavier, painting the town in layers of forgetfulness. But inside the warmth of the station, the four of them sat in silence, mending, moment by quiet moment, what had been broken. Night fell with the soundlessness of thick snow settling over a world already muted. The police station, usually little more than an outpost of order in gray pines, became a sanctuary of pale lamplight and quiet footsteps. Inside, Elliot moved with careful purpose, his boots making almost no sound on the worn linoleum, the collar of his shirt still stiff with the cold that clung to him like memory. He fetched blankets from a cupboard, their flannel faded from years of winter. The twins, June and Joan, sat close together on the old wooden bench near the radiator, their faces pink now from warmth, hands still nestled in the pockets of borrowed coats. Sig paced a slow circle around the room before settling at their feet, stretching long along the floorboards as if marking the boundary of a safe new world. Elliot prepared the small cot in the back room. He layered extra blankets, smoothing them flat with hands that lingered at the corners, tucking in softness wherever he could find it. He set out a nightlight, a faded yellow plug-in shaped like a crescent moon, near the foot of the cot, the gentle glow cutting just enough of the darkness. When he returned, June was staring into the shallow bowl of milk, her thumb circling the rim. Joan pressed her nose to the sleeve of Sig's fur, eyes already drifting shut. He offered no questions. Instead, he nodded toward the cot. And after a pause, June slid off the bench, Joan following. Their steps were heavy, slow, but they did not resist. Sig padded after them, the girls almost disappearing into his broad shadow as they crossed the threshold into the back room. The cot was just large enough for both. June climbed in first, knees drawn tight, then made room for Joan. Elliot draped a blanket over them, tucking the corners close, the same way he once had for someone else, in a life measured in tenderness and loss. Sig circled 3 times at the foot of the cot before lying down, nose pressed to the fringe of the blanket, his chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. Elliot watched the girls breathing slow, watched their shoulders settle, watched the way they turned toward each other in sleep. In the hush of that small room, time unraveled. The night outside deepened, the wind carrying snow in wild, weightless spirals across empty streets. He stepped out to the hallway, closing the door to a crack. Alone now, Elliot found himself in the corridor washed with the weak light of a ceiling bulb. He stood still, letting his head fall against the cool cinder block wall, the smell of old paint and paper files settling around him. His hands wrapped around a mug of tea, still hot from the kettle, the steam curling up into the tired lines of his face. He listened to the quiet, the clink of the radiator, the soft whisper of Sig's tail against wood, the almost imperceptible murmur of Joan's breath. He felt his own chest rise and fall, counting the beats as if each one might bring the world closer to something mended. There were memories he could not avoid, nights in a hospital room, the hush broken only by the shiver of machines and the ghost of a voice he still heard in dreams. He pressed his palm to his chest, feeling the quick, startled drum of his heart, as if surprised by the work it still had to do. An hour passed, then 2. He checked on the girls, once, then twice, his presence a shadow in the doorway. Each time he found them huddled together, one small hand always finding its way to Sig's fur, the dog's ears twitching at the faintest movement but never rising, never leaving his post. Joan's lips parted in sleep, the tiniest sound escaping, half sigh, half word. June turned, murmured something that might have been comfort, or might have only been a breath. Elliot sat at the old metal desk in the next room, sorting through paperwork he did not read. Outside, the town slept under a sky veiled by snow, lights glowing faint in distant windows. Sometimes he let his eyes close, listening not for trouble but for the small confirmations of safety, a shift on the cot, a sigh, the gentle snore of a dog who understood the value of staying. He wrote a note in the station's log, simple and spare. 2 miners brought in from Forest Road. No visible injuries. Warm, safe, sleeping. He did not add how his own hands trembled, how relief and fear coiled inside him like the twin lines of footprints left in the snow. He did not mention how Sig, for all his scars and silences, seemed to fill the spaces left empty by words. He did not say that the hush in the building felt less like absence and more like belonging, a communion of broken pieces, fitting together in ways that required nothing but nearness. When the clock drifted past midnight, Elliot walked the corridor once more, pausing at the window where frost feathered the glass. He watched the snow fall in slow, patient layers, erasing the old world, making space for something new. He stood like that for a long time, until his tea grew cold and his heart settled into a rhythm that felt, if not healed, at least understood. And as he turned back toward the gentle golden door where June, Joan, and Sig dreamed in the safe nest of blankets and quiet, Elliot felt, for the first time in a long while, the subtle relief of not being alone. When morning finally arrived, it crept into the station with the caution of someone entering a room where grief still lingered. The window above the cot glowed with a thin, pale light, casting long, blue-edged shadows across the floor. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the world softened and muted, every branch holding the weight of a silent night. Inside, warmth clung to the little room, the lingering scent of tea, the body heat of a dog at the foot of the bed, the soft rise and fall of breath. Joan woke first, stirring beneath the blanket. Her hair was wild, curling against her cheek, and her eyes, when they opened, were slow to focus. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. Then she felt the weight of Sig pressed against her feet, and sensing his nearness, she closed her eyes again, just breathing. June shifted beside her, her own dreams dissolving into the hush. She reached a hand beneath the blanket, searching for her sister's arm, and when she found it, she squeezed once, gentle and certain. The morning was fragile, so easy to disturb, so full of possibility. Elliot had risen before dawn, the old habit of early patrol still lodged in his bones. He moved quietly through the halls, his footsteps muffled by socks, the world still half asleep. He set a kettle to boil, prepared 3 bowls of instant oatmeal, and crumbled a biscuit into a dish for Sig. He listened to the hum of the radiator, the faint creak of the station settling. There was peace in the routine, a kind of promise that the world could be made gentle, at least for a little while. When he brought breakfast to the back room, he paused in the doorway, watching the small tableau. Sig, already awake, lifting his head with soft eyes. Joan sitting upright, blanket drawn around her shoulders. June, alert now, her gaze following the play of dust in the morning light. He set the bowls on the edge of the cot, spooned the biscuit into Sig's dish, and sat on the floor with his own bowl. There were no words. The girls reached for the food, hands hesitant but hungry. The clink of spoons was the only sound, joined by the gentle lapping of Sig's tongue against porcelain. After a few bites, June turned to Sig and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was rough from sleep, but there was gratitude in the way her hand found his fur and lingered there, stroking slow and sure. Joan, silent for so long, watched her sister and then looked up at Elliot. Her voice, when it came, was almost a question, almost a memory. "Do you miss her?" The words hung in the air, not heavy, but soft, like a thread tying one heart to another. Elliot did not answer right away. He held his bowl in his lap, thumb circling the rim. The air in the room seemed to still. Finally, he nodded, just once, and looked past the girls to the window, where the snow on the sill glimmered in the growing light. "Yes," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I do." It was enough. Joan leaned back into Sig's side, her body relaxing in a way it hadn't since they'd found her in the snow. June, eyes shining, looked from Elliot to her sister, then out the window, as if the world had suddenly become a place where sorrow was allowed, where it could be carried together. They ate in silence for a while. Outside, the sound of a distant truck plowing Main Street drifted through the walls, a reminder that life continued beyond the sanctuary of the station. Elliot watched as the girls finished their food, licking the spoons clean with the seriousness of children who had known hunger. After breakfast, Elliot gathered the bowls, stacked them in the sink, and returned with a clean towel and a cup of warm water. He gently wiped the girls' faces, the gesture slow and careful. Sig watched, his tail thumping once against the floor, then resting still. The station filled with a golden hush. The girls found colored pencils in a drawer and began to draw, at first hesitantly, then with growing certainty. Shapes that looked like circles and dogs and trees. Elliot sat nearby, leafing through a newspaper he did not read, listening to the small scritch of pencils on paper, the rustle of blankets, the patient breathing of the dog at their feet. Later, June set her drawing on the table. A dog curled beside two stick-figure girls, all beneath a wide blue sky. Joan's picture was more uncertain, lines and swirls and the faint outline of a woman's face, half-finished, eyes kind. Elliot studied both drawings for a long moment, then pinned them gently to the bulletin board above the desk. Sig, sensing a shift, stood and stretched, front paws splayed on the linoleum, then padded over to Elliot and rested his head on the man's knee. Elliot's hand dropped to the dog's neck, fingers sifting through thick fur. The weight of the gesture was its own language, two creatures carrying old losses, both learning in small, halting steps that comfort could be given as well as received. By mid-morning, the world outside was bright, snow dazzling in the sunlight. Joan pressed her nose to the glass, watching as the first sparrow of spring, early, reckless, landed on the windowsill. June joined her, the two girls side by side, their shoulders touching, breathing in time. For a little while at least, the day held them. In the warmth of a sunbeam, in the steady presence of a dog, in the quiet acceptance of a man learning to open his heart again, the fragile beginnings of trust took root. Nothing was fixed, nothing was finished, but in the gentle light, with breakfast shared and silence honored, life, tentative, imperfect, persistent, returned. That afternoon, sunlight stretched thin and watery across gray pines, glinting off melting icicles and the still bright crust of snow. The world seemed to be waking, the hush of night dissolving into the cautious bustle of a small town beginning again. Inside the station, the morning calm gave way to small, necessary tasks. Calls answered, logs updated, the radio crackling occasionally with distant voices. Elliot worked at his desk, methodical but unfocused. In the next room, the twins' laughter surfaced for the first time, a breathless, startled sound, as if even they weren't sure it was allowed. He heard pencils rolling across the floor. Joan's small gasp as Sig, ever gentle, nudged a dropped crayon back toward her with his nose. June's voice rose not in words, but in a soft hum that filled the empty spaces between old scars. But beneath the surface of comfort, Elliot knew questions still circled. The girl's silence was not just exhaustion or shock. It was the hush of those who had learned that pain often followed hope, that trusting could invite its own kind of loss. He began his inquiry gently, with the careful detachment of someone who understood the cost of intrusion. He reviewed missing persons reports, hospital admissions, welfare calls, quietly piecing together a story he already sensed beneath the surface. Two girls, seldom at school, a father's name absent from the last year's forms, a mother whose phone was never answered. Neighbors' notes, children often alone, lights on late, barking dog, then silence. When a knock came at the door, Elliot's heart tightened. On the other side stood Miss Leonard from Social Services, her expression taut with concern and fatigue. She entered quietly, keeping her voice low. "We've been searching for their mother, but the address is empty," she murmured, her eyes darting to where June and Joan sat with Sig in the sunbeam. "Their father's name hasn't come up for months." Elliot nodded, accepting the names, dates, the faded photographs Miss Leonard handed him. But it was the children's drawings, still taped above his desk, that told him most of what mattered. He saw in Joan's half-finished face not only the loss of a parent, but the way a child learns to hold silence in her body, learns to hide hurt behind the veil of not asking for anything. He stepped outside to make a call, the air still crisp with the echo of winter. His breath hung before him as he waited on hold, the line hissing and stuttering with static. At last, a voice answered, tired, defeated, barely more than a whisper. "Hello?" The mother's story, when it came, was as simple as it was sorrowful. She had run from a man who hit, who screamed, who left the children for days while he drank or disappeared with strangers. She'd run with nothing, thinking she would return for her daughters once she found a job, a place safe enough, a new start. She hadn't imagined the loneliness would last so long. She hadn't imagined that by the time she could come back, she would be so far from who she used to be. Elliot listened, letting the pauses speak for themselves. He heard in her words the echo of his own memories, how pain could be inherited, how wounds passed down become a quiet language spoken in glances, absences, the trembling hush before the storm. Back in the station, June and Joan waited, eyes tracking every movement at the window. They did not ask where he had gone. They had learned already how to endure the suspense of not knowing if or when someone would return. When Elliot stepped inside again, his face was grave but gentle. He knelt before the girls, Sig at his side. He did not ask for explanations, did not press for stories. Instead, he set a cup of warm broth in each girl's hands and sat with them on the cold tile floor. The room filled with the smell of chicken and rosemary, the slow hush of hunger met and sated. Joan, for the first time, spoke unprompted. "Will Mama come?" she asked, her voice so quiet that only Elliot and Sig, and perhaps the sunlight, heard. Elliot looked into her eyes, saw in them not only fear, but a longing so deep it felt endless. He did not make promises he could not keep. Instead, he brushed a stray curl from her forehead, and with a weight that needed no explanation said, "We'll wait together." That evening, Miss Leonard returned, her steps weary. She brought with her a folded letter, the mother's handwriting shaky, ink blotted with apologies. The girls read in silence, June tracing every word with her finger, Joan holding the page close to her chest, as if the paper itself might breathe warmth back into old wounds. Sig, never far from their side, pressed his head beneath Joan's arm, a silent comfort. Elliot watched this tableau from the door, hands in his pockets, eyes wet with something he would never name. He knew then, healing was not a matter of forgetting, but of making room for sorrow, of allowing new roots to twist through broken earth. Later, as darkness gathered and the streetlights flickered to life, Elliot made up a small bed in the station's spare room, tucking the girls in once more. He sat with them until sleep came, the dog curled between their cots, the air thick with the mingled scent of lavender and wool. He did not speak of hope, or healing, or forgiveness. Instead, he waited, listened to the rhythm of their breaths, felt the old ache in his chest loosen, just a little, with every exhale. Sig raised his head once, met Elliot's eyes. There was understanding there, as if the dog, too, knew what it meant to be left and found and left again. In the soft light, with the hush of night wrapping the small family together, the wounds that had brought them here began, quietly, to knit themselves into something new. The days in gray pines stretched longer as winter softened its grip, the light lingering a little later each afternoon. In the station, the rhythm of routine became something the girls and Sig could trust. A morning of oatmeal and warm milk, a midday walk through the quiet town, evenings spent beneath the soft hum of lamps and the crackle of logs in the station's fireplace. Elliot moved through these days with measured calm, never hurrying the girls, never pressing for more than what they could offer. He helped with small tasks, tying shoelaces, brushing tangled hair, offering a steady hand as Joan balanced on the curb outside the bakery. He listened to their silences, learned to read the set of their shoulders, the way their eyes tracked the world. He spoke little, but his presence filled the spaces where trust was slowly, cautiously rebuilding. Sig was always close by, shadowing the twins with patient devotion. On afternoons, when sunlight found its way through thinning clouds, the four of them wandered the snowy paths behind the station. June would hold Elliot's hand, her palm small and sure in his. Joan, always just a step behind, often grasped Sig's tail, an unspoken pact between the wary and the wounded. The dog bore this with a kind of dignity, glancing back every so often to ensure she was there, that she hadn't slipped into some silent place he couldn't reach. On one such walk, the group stopped beside the frozen pond at the edge of the woods. The ice was opaque, clouded with white, the surface scratched with the memory of long-past skates and laughter. Elliot lifted June to the edge, her boots crunching softly as she peered down. Joan knelt beside Sig, her breath fogging the air as she traced her reflection on the ice with a gloved finger. There, in that pale mirror, 4 shapes appeared, blurred and imperfect, but together. The girls giggled as their faces stretched and warped, June's smile curling wide, Joan's eyes bright for the first time since their world had changed. Elliot watched them from a little distance, heart aching with a hope he hadn't felt in years. He caught his own reflection beside Sig's, a man older than he remembered, wearier, but somehow more whole. No one spoke of the future. There were no promises, only gestures. Elliot had filled out paperwork with social services, volunteering as a foster guardian, while the girl's mother pieced her life together in a shelter a few towns over. The arrangement was temporary, but in the small moments, shared meals, bedtime stories read softly in the glow of a lamp, Sig curled between their beds, the sense of impermanence faded. Inside, the station grew into a home not by design, but by accumulation. Crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, mismatched socks drying on the radiator, June's shoes lined up beside Elliot's heavy boots. The kitchen, once a place of hurried coffee and stale bread, now carried the scent of cinnamon and toast. Joan, at breakfast one morning, whispered to Sig about the cat she hoped to see again someday, her voice a thread of longing woven into the hush of dawn. Elliot watched over it all with the tender vigilance of someone who knew how quickly comfort could disappear. He left notes for June in the margins of library books. He mended Joan's mitten with crooked stitches, apologizing for the clumsiness but not for the effort. Sometimes, he would find the girls sitting together in the front room, Sig's head in Joan's lap, June reading aloud in a halting, hopeful voice. As spring crept near, the snow receded from the streets, leaving behind rivulets of cold water and patches of raw, brown earth. Elliot took the girls for a walk in the woods, the 4 of them moving at the pace of children discovering the world anew. June skipped ahead, pointing out small green shoots breaking through the thawing ground. Joan knelt to study a beetle crawling across a fallen branch, Sig settling at her side, his tail thumping softly. At the edge of the clearing, Elliot paused. He knelt, drawing the girls close, Sig pressing in so that all four shared the same breath, the same patch of sunlight. They stood in silence for a long moment, the hush not empty but full, of forgiveness, of presence, of the promise that they could choose every day to stay. On the walk home, Elliot smiled, quietly, for the first time in what felt like years. The girls caught the glimmer of it, and their laughter bubbled up, unguarded. Sig lifted his ears, caught the sound, and in a burst of childish delight, June wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. Joan followed, and for a heartbeat, the cold world shrank down to the warm, wild tangle of dog, girls, and the man who had chosen not to look away. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purple and gold, Elliot sat by the window, Sig's head resting on his knee. The girls sprawled on the rug with crayons and battered picture books. The air was thick with quiet, the good kind, the kind that means no one is waiting for the next blow, the next disappearance. Nothing was finished. But here, in this borrowed peace, the work of healing continued. Slow, imperfect, real. And in their togetherness, something fragile and fierce took root. The kind of hope that comes only after you've learned what it means to be left behind and to be found again. Winter retreated not in a rush, but as a slow forgiveness. The sun higher, the snow pulling back from porch steps, rivulets running beneath the eaves. There were days when the sky stretched wide and blue over gray pines, and days when gray clouds returned, making the world once again close and small. But inside the little house Elliot called home, the seasons changed in their own gentle rhythm. On a late afternoon, soft gold spilling over the windowsill, June and Joan sat together on the rug before the fire. They had gathered their crayons and pencils in a battered tin, each sheet of paper covered in loops and lines. Dogs, trees, stick-figure families holding hands under improbable suns. Joan's feet tucked beneath her, June humming as she shaded the curl of Sig's tail, careful to get the scar just right on his left leg. The fire popped and settled, sending out the sharp scent of pine sap, and the room breathed with it. Elliot sat in the old armchair, a book open but unread on his lap, his eyes drifting between the girls and the slow tumble of snow outside. He listened to the life in the room, the scrape of crayon against paper, the click of Joan's tongue as she worked out a new shape, the soft huff of Sig's breath as he sprawled content and watchful at their feet. Sig had found his place. Just as much as the girls, he curled beneath the window now, always near enough to touch, his body a living border between them and the world outside. When June's fingers stilled, he nudged her hand, reminding her with a gentle press that he was there, steadfast, willing to absorb whatever fears the day might yet bring. Joan reached for his paw, holding it in her small fist, and Sig shifted so she would not let go. No one hurried. No one asked for explanations. The hours passed not in tasks or conversations, but in the slow unfolding of trust, one drawing at a time, one small act of kindness echoing another. Elliot rose and made cocoa on the old stove, the girls crowding in close as the milk frothed, the air thick with cinnamon and a sweetness that lingered long after the mugs were emptied. Sig lay at their feet, chin resting on June's slipper, tail thumping softly in a rhythm all his own. There were moments, now and then, when the old ache returned. Joan would pause at the window, her breath clouding the glass as she watched for a face she still sometimes dreamed of in the night. June would hold Elliot's hand a little tighter, as if needing to reassure herself that he remained. Elliot understood. Pain did not vanish. It learned to live alongside comfort, each making space for the other. In the gentle hush of late afternoon, he felt the shape of loss settle more lightly. The first crocuses appeared by the path outside, defiant and bright. June spotted them and called Joan, who hurried barefoot across the floor to see. Elliot watched from the porch as the girls crouched in the cold mud, Sig at their side, noses pressed close to purple petals, the three of them making a small circle of discovery. They lingered long enough for their cheeks to pink and their hair to fill with wind, then came tumbling back inside, tracking laughter and dirt in equal measure. That night, after supper, Elliot set a stack of clean paper and colored pencils on the kitchen table. He watched the girls draw, one picture after another, filling each page with the world as they wanted it to be. A house with 4 windows, a dog asleep by the fire, 2 sisters beneath a sky that never seemed to end. Elliot joined them, adding a crooked sun to Joan's landscape, earning a soft giggle in the glow of being included. Sig curled at Elliot's feet, his head heavy on the man's shoe, eyes half closed in perfect trust. The fire burned down to embers, filling the room with a red glow, and the 3 humans gathered around the dog, finding warmth not only in his body, but in the simple fact of belonging. No words were needed to bind them, no promises, no declarations. In the hush of the closing day, the love in the room made itself known in the way June traced Sig's scar with her thumb, the way Joan leaned her head against Elliot's arm, the way Elliot, at last, rested his palm on the curve of Sig's back, closing his eyes as if to keep that feeling safe inside. Through the window the snow had stopped, the last traces melting under the faint light of an early spring moon. The world outside was quiet, but the quiet inside was different. A fullness, not an emptiness. A peace, not a void. Sig stirred, lifting his head to rest on Elliot's leg. The girls, nearly asleep, pressed close. In the flickering light, all that could be heard was the rustle of a turning page, the settling of logs in the fire, the slow, steady breathing of 4 beings, each once left behind, now choosing, moment after moment, to stay. And so the days went on, not perfect, but enough. The story did not end. It simply became something new, a slow and gentle song, sung quietly in a house where, at last, no one was alone. There are places in this world where healing happens quietly. Sometimes it's a wounded dog resting his head on your lap. Sometimes it's the small, steady sound of children drawing in the light of a fading day. And sometimes it's simply the courage to stay, day after day, when it would be easier to disappear. In Grey Pines, no one was saved by miracles or grand gestures. They found one another in the ordinary. A bowl of oatmeal, a hand reached out in silence, the hush of a room where leaving was never the only choice. Perhaps the truest kind of healing is found in that quiet refusal to abandon one another, even when words fall short. That is where hope grows back, soft and stubborn as spring grass after snow. If this story spoke to a part of you that's still mending, or if you've ever found comfort in the company of someone, human or animal, who simply chose to stay, I'd love to hear your story. What moment lingered with you most? Leave a comment below. And if you believe in the gentle power of kindness, join us for more stories that honor the quiet courage in all of us.